Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at green politics and post-colonialism.
Two big ones. Yeah.
Two big ones. And I think this will be a good one for people, those of you who are interested in international relations.
Especially if you're prepping for the UPSC exams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely for the UPSC exams, but I think also just in general.
Yeah.
I mean, these are
in the news every day.
They're in the news every day. And I think, getting a grasp of them really helps you understand like the world around you better.
Right. And what's really cool is that the stuff that we're going to be talking about today comes from a book that's often recommended for the UPSC International Relations syllabus.
Nice.
You're kind of getting a 2-for-1 here.
Yeah, exactly. You're hitting two birds with one stone exam prep.
Yeah.
Just like expanding your worldview.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Let's start with green politics.
Okay.
Now, when you hear green politics,
yeah,
I don't know about you, but I kind of get this image of like tree huggers chaining themselves to trees, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely the stereotype.
But it's way more nuanced than that.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it than that. So at its heart, green politics is about recognizing that connection between humans and the natural world.
Okay, so it's not just about like protecting the environment out there somewhere.
Yeah.
It's about understanding that we are part of this.
Yeah, we're part of the ecosystem.
We're part of it.
We're interconnected.
Yeah.
And that has real implications for all sorts of things that we do, like how we approach economic development, even how we think about international relations.
Okay, so how does this like actually play out on the global stage?
Right.
Is it just about countries like signing agreements to plant more trees, or is there more to it?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that aspect of it, but it's really a spectrum, I would say.
Okay.
On one end, you have what we call reformist approaches.
Yeah.
Like thinking about things like sustainable development, the idea that, we need to find a way to balance economic growth with protecting the environment.
Right. So like finding a way to progress and, not completely trash the planet
right
at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this has been a huge focus, especially in the global south, right, where countries are trying to lift their populations out of poverty, but at the same time they're also dealing with the effects of climate change.
Right. It's like,
Yeah.
how do you
It's a tough balancing act.
Yeah, how do you balance those two things?
Yeah.
So we've got the reformists
Yeah.
who are trying to find that balance.
Right.
But you said there's a spectrum?
Yeah.
So what's on the other end?
So on the other end of that spectrum, you have the radical green thinkers.
Okay.
These are folks who are calling for a much more fundamental shift in the way we think about organizing society.
Yeah.
They want to see deep systemic changes.
Okay, so a little more revolutionary.
You could say that, for example, you have eco-socialists who believe that capitalism with its focus on endless growth is really at the root of our environmental problems.
Okay.
You have deep ecologists who argue for a complete paradigm shift.
Paradigm shift.
Where we recognize the value of all living beings, not just human beings.
So they're basically saying we need to completely rethink our relationship with nature.
Exactly.
Okay.
Challenge that idea that nature is something we can control and exploit and really see ourselves as part of a web of life.
Yeah.
Where all beings have a right to exist.
Okay. Wow. So we've gone from sustainable development to questioning the very foundation of our relationship with nature.
Yeah.
Green politics is a lot more complex than I think.
It is.
It appears at first glance.
That's much more than just, hugging trees.
Yeah, exactly.
There's some real deep philosophical and political ideas in there.
Right. Okay. So that's one side of the coin.
Right.
Green politics.
Yeah.
Now let's flip that coin over and talk about post-colonialism.
Yeah.
Now this might seem like a totally different beast.
Right.
But I think what's interesting is that both green politics and post-colonialism actually challenge power structures.
Yeah, in different ways, but they both get at that question of power.
Yeah, in different ways. But yeah, they're both looking at power and how it is wielded and how it affects the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so post-colonialism.
Okay.
I have to admit, the term itself sounds a little bit like academic jargony.
It can be a little bit intimidating.
Yeah. So can you break it down for us? Like, what is it really about?
Sure, yeah. So imagine this, right? Think about the way we learn history.
Okay.
Think about who are the heroes, who are the villains, whose stories get told and whose stories don't get told.
Right.
Postcolonialism is about really examining those narratives.
Okay.
It's about looking at the ways that the legacies of colonialism continue to shape the way we think, even after empires have crumbled.
So it's not just about, like, countries gaining independence
Right.
politically.
Yeah, it's not just about the political event of independence.
There's a deeper...
There.
Yeah, exactly. There's a deeper cultural, intellectual, even psychological dimension to it.
Okay, so how does this post-colonial perspective, like how does that actually help us analyze international relations?
Okay, so it gives us a really critical lens, I think, to examine these global power dynamics. And one of the key figures in post-colonial thought is Edward Said.
Okay, I think I've heard of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he developed this really important concept called Orientalism.
Orientalism?
Yeah. Have you heard of that?
I think so.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I could explain it.
Okay, so basically it's a way of understanding how the West often depicts the East
Okay.
through a lens of stereotypes and distortions.
Okay, so like portraying Eastern cultures as being mysterious
Like,
or exotic,
yeah.
like they're stuck in the past or something like that.
Exactly. You know, you think of those classic stereotypes, like the mysterious East,
Right.
the inscrutable Chinese,
Yeah.
the lustful Turks.
Yeah. You know, and Said argued that these depictions, even though they're often presented as kind of harmless, you know,
Yeah.
they actually serve to reinforce Western dominance
Right.
and even justify intervention in other parts of the world.
Okay, so these like seemingly harmless stereotypes
Right.
can actually have real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it shapes not just how the West views the East,
Right.
but also how Western nations view themselves, right?
Okay.
They often assume this mantle of the international community, you know,
Yeah.
with the authority to intervene in other parts of the world, even if those interventions are not always welcome or beneficial.
Wow. Okay, so even things like humanitarian aid
Right.
and intervention,
Yeah,
those can be viewed through this
absolutely.
post-colonial lens.
Yeah, post-colonialism encourages us to ask, you know, who benefits from these actions? Who gets to decide what help looks like?
Yeah.
And whose voices are being marginalized in the process?
Wow, this is pretty heavy stuff.
It is.
But it's so interesting.
It's fascinating.
So we've gone from sustainable development and paradigm shifts to Orientalism and questioning humanitarian intervention.
Yeah.
My brain's like,
Let's take in.
yeah, a lot to take
Yeah,
in.
but it's all connected, right? It's all about understanding how these different forces shape the world that we live in.
Yeah, it's like putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing the world
Yeah,
in
exactly.
a totally different way.
Yeah, it's about seeing those things that are often hidden in plain sight.
Right. Okay, this has been amazing, but I think we need to take a little break.
Yeah, let's give our brains a rest.
Give our brains a rest, and then we'll come back and we'll dig even deeper into all of this.
Sounds good.
So stay tuned.
Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were talking about how post-colonialism encourages us to look at the world with fresh eyes.
Right.
To unpack these power dynamics that are often hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, it's like we've been handed a decoder ring to understand the subtle messages embedded in everything.
I like that. From news headlines to international policies.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Okay.
And this decoder ring is particularly useful when we're trying to understand, you know, complex issues like international aid and humanitarian intervention.
Okay, so let's apply that lens here.
Okay.
What are some of the things we might notice about these issues when we're looking at them from a post-colonial perspective?
Well, for instance, humanitarian intervention, which is often presented as this kind of benevolent act by Western nations,
Right.
can sometimes be interpreted as a continuation of those colonial patterns.
So instead of troops and colonies, it's aid and NGOs.
Right.
But the underlying power dynamics might not be all that different.
Yeah, that's a really sharp observation.
Okay.
The idea that Western nations have this responsibility and the right to intervene in other parts of the world often echoes those paternalistic attitudes of the colonial era.
Like, we know what's best for you,
Right.
so we're going to step in and fix things, even if...
The people in those countries might have a different perspective on what fixing things actually means.
Precisely. And the post-colonial critique highlights that potential for these interventions to be driven by, you know, Western interests and to unintentionally further marginalize the voices and the agency of those they're trying to help.
Right, so it's like even when the intentions are good,
That's right.
there's this risk of repeating the mistakes of the past.
Absolutely.
And this reminds me of Edward Said's concept of Orientalism
Yeah.
that we discussed earlier. Could those Orientalist tendencies like seep into humanitarian interventions as well.
Oh, absolutely. Orientalism can definitely shape the narratives
Okay.
surrounding these interventions, justifying certain actions while obscuring others.
Okay.
For example, portraying a region as being inherently unstable or incapable of self-governance,
Right.
that
Yeah.
could be used to legitimize outside intervention.
So it's like those pre-existing stereotypes are used to create a justification for intervention,
Yeah.
even if the situation on the ground is far more complex.
Exactly. And this ties back to that idea of the international community, which often gets thrown around in discussions of global affairs.
Yeah, like who is this international community? And
Exactly. Postcolonialism encourages us to ask, who exactly makes up this international community, whose voices are amplified and whose are silenced?
right, it's like the term itself can mask the fact that it's often predominantly Western nations
Right.
driving the agenda and defining what constitutes like acceptable behavior on the global stage.
Exactly. And again, this isn't to say that all humanitarian interventions are inherently problematic or driven by a malicious intent,
Right.
but it's crucial to be aware of these potential biases and power dynamics when analyzing these situations.
It sounds like postcolonialism is really about cultivating a critical eye,
Yeah.
asking tough questions, and being aware of that historical baggage that we all carry.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about challenging assumptions, deconstructing power structures, and amplifying the voices and experiences of those who've been historically marginalized. And I think, this is a crucial skill for anyone who wants to understand the world, especially for those who are gearing up for that UPSC exam.
Yeah, definitely for our listeners who are on that UPSC journey.
Yeah.
Remember that examiners aren't just looking for textbook definitions.
Right.
They're looking for candidates who can critically engage with these complex ideas, connect the dots, and demonstrate a nuanced understanding of global affairs.
Couldn't agree more. And postcolonialism gives you a framework to do just that.
Okay.
It pushes you to move beyond those simplistic explanations and really grapple with the messy realities of history and power.
This all so fascinating, but I have to admit, it's a lot to take in. It's like we've been staring at a magic eye picture for too long, and now our brains need a break.
I hear you.
Okay.
But before we give those neurons a rest, let's do a quick recap.
Okay.
We've seen how postcolonialism helps us unpack those hidden power dynamics in international relations and how it challenges us to think critically about things like humanitarian intervention.
Right, and we've also seen how these ideas aren't just abstract theories.
Right.
They're actually playing out in the real world, shaping policies, decisions, and global events.
Right. So now with this post-colonial lens firmly in place, let's shift gears and reconnect with green politics. We'll explore how these ideas intersect with real-world issues like sustainable development and the global response to climate change.
Sounds like a plan. Buckle up, everyone. We're about to dive back in the world of green politics. All right, so we've explored post-colonialism, uncovered those hidden power dynamics, and now we're back to the green side of things. Earlier, we were talking about that spectrum of green politics.
Yeah.
From the reformists pushing for sustainable development to those more radical thinkers advocating for a total paradigm shift.
Right. And as we discussed, sustainable development is a particularly crucial concept for the Global South, where countries are grappling with that challenge of economic growth alongside environmental protection.
Right. It's a tough balancing act.
It is.
Okay, so let's talk about how these different green perspectives approach a massive issue like climate change.
Okay.
On the one hand, we have those reformists pushing for sustainable development. What are some of their strategies?
Well, reformists often focus on, practical solutions and international cooperation.
Okay.
They advocate for things like investing in renewable energy technologies, reducing carbon emissions through policies like carbon taxes, and promoting more sustainable consumption patterns.
So it's like working within the existing system,
Yeah.
but trying to steer it in a greener direction.
Exactly. Working within the system, but trying to make it more sustainable.
Okay.
A great example of this approach is the Paris Agreement,
Okay.
where countries around the world committed to reducing their emissions to limit global warming.
Right.
That's a classic example of reformist green politics in action on a global scale.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Right.
But what about those more radical green thinkers? How would they approach the climate crisis?
Well, they would argue that these incremental changes,
Yeah.
aren't enough to address the scale of the problem.
Okay.
They believe we need a more fundamental shift in our relationship with nature,
Okay.
a complete overhaul of our economic and social systems.
So going back to that idea of a paradigm shift.
Exactly, a paradigm shift.
Okay.
They might advocate for things like degrowth,
Okay.
which challenges the idea of endless economic expansion and relocalizing economies to reduce our reliance on global trade and transportation, which often comes with a hefty environmental price tag.
So it's about recognizing that we can't just keep consuming and polluting
Right.
at the current rate without facing some pretty serious consequences.
Exactly. It's about questioning some of those fundamental assumptions of our current economic model and exploring alternative ways of living within our planetary boundaries. It's a pretty radical departure from mainstream thinking, but it raises some really crucial questions about our values and priorities in the face of this climate crisis.
It definitely challenges us to think outside the box. And for our listeners who are preparing for the UPSC, this is where you can really shine.
Yeah.
By understanding these diverse perspectives on green politics, you can craft well-rounded arguments in your essays and demonstrate that you've gone beyond the textbook.
Absolutely. Being able to analyze those nuances and present different viewpoints is what sets a great UPSC candidate apart.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into green politics and postcolonialism, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned.
Yeah.
We've uncovered hidden power dynamics, challenged assumptions, and explored a range of perspectives on some of the most pressing issues facing our world today.
And we've seen how these concepts aren't just theoretical frameworks.
Right.
They're tools that can help us understand and analyze real-world events and policies.
Exactly. For those of you prepping for the UPSC, this knowledge is pure gold for your international relations prep. But honestly, even if you're not taking the exam, understanding these ideas just makes you a more informed global citizen.
Yeah.
It's about asking critical questions, challenging the status quo, and recognizing that we're all interconnected.
Absolutely.
With each other and with this planet we call home.
It's about realizing that the personal is political and the local is global.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
So here's a final thought-provoking question to leave you with. Think about a recent news story or event. Can you see the threads of green politics and postcolonialism woven through it?
I bet you can.
I bet you can, and that's the power of these concepts. Once you start seeing them, you can't unsee them.
Right.
They're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
So keep those brains buzzing, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the world with those critical lenses firmly in place. And if you enjoy this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your fellow global thinkers. Until next time, happy exploring.